Welcome, everybody. We are pleasure to announce this 50th session of the cycle Territory Talks. These Territory Talks are a cycle that are part of the celebration of the 20 years of the CETRAD, the Center for Transdisciplinary Development Studies. And for the ones that already follow us, and I have a word more for the newcomers. Basically, these Territory Talks were thought as a contribution to imagine, to discuss, to rethink the place that the territories can and should occupy in the construction of a perspective, desirable and possible scenarios for Portugal, Europe, and other regions in the world, accounting for these major societal challenges. And we already discussed in the previous Territory Talks, like demographic crisis, like the scenarios for Portuguese development, the climate change and the implications of climate change in the future of Portugal and activities and the urbanization and so on, and also the water scarcity. And now in this 50th session, we are also discussing an important social challenge, and it's very symbolic, the date, because we reached 8 billion people in the world. And this is a major challenge, how to feed and to feed well all these huge population in the world and in Europe and in Portugal. So now I give the word to my colleague, Luís Ramos, and he will introduce this session of today.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Buonasera, Lorenzo. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and to speak about the future of good and agriculture and the alternative pathways to 2050. I think that your intervention is based on FAO report, foresight exercise that outlines alternative scenarios with identification of strategic orientations to guide food and agricultural systems along sustainable pathways of national, regional, and global levels. I remind that you, Lorenzo, Giovanni, Bellù, is the team leader at the FAO Global Perspective Studies team with a long career as a senior economist. So, Lorenzo, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me first. Hello, good evening to everybody. Thanks for the interest in the work of FAO, in particular on the work on the future of food and agriculture, which is indeed an endeavor, because when we try to look into the future, or if you want to understand how the future could develop, and we have in mind complex systems like agri-food systems, I mean, we don't have many milestones to rely upon, and we have, in a sense, to exert a bit of fantasy and creativity. But let's go step by step, and this evening I would like to share with you, first of all, some of the findings of our recent exercises, particularly the one that you mentioned, Alternative Pathways to 2050, with some highlights of the work that we have just finished. In fact, it's still in progress to some extent, that we presented in July at the Committee on Agriculture, which is a governing body of the FAO. So, let me share my screen for a while so you can see what it's all about. So this evening in particular, I would like to talk about alternative pathways, let's say how the future may develop along alternative routes, what are the strategic options that may be available if we want to move food and agriculture along a desirable pathway, and what are the trade-offs that we are going to face, or we may face. Trade-offs, I mean objectives that cannot be achieved all at the same time at the maximum level. So trade-offs mean if we want to achieve something, we have to give up something else. And we will enter into these issues in some more detail in a while. So the FAO reports on the future of food and agriculture, particularly the last that we have published, the so-called FOFA 2050, and the one that we are going to publish in a while, it is planned for the 2nd of December, explore alternative pathways to achieve a sustainable and resilient food system transformation. Of course, in order to envisage something, we have to understand what are the driving forces that determine or contribute to determine the dynamics of these systems. Both reports identify a set of drivers. Some of them are common to both reports, some others are more specific. In particular, in the one that we are going to finish, drivers and triggers for transformation, we put emphasis on some, I would say, let me allow to call them new drivers, despite the fact that they are not really new. There is a new emphasis, if you want, on some drivers. Of course, there are well-known drivers that will determine, that determine the patterns of agri-food systems, in particular population growth, global population growth, growth of population in different continents at different speeds. Another driver, another important driver is the economic growth that increases the purchasing power of some people, not so much of other people, and this is an issue that I'm going to deal with in a while. But in general, the fact that the changes in income may change the demand of food, and the level of income may also determine which type of food people are going to demand and consume. So, but on the top of these well-known drivers, the new report, Drivers and Triggers for Transformation, put an accent on some drivers which had already been identified in the past, but given the circumstances, given in particular the recent events like the pandemics or the Russia-Ukraine war, or even the approaching of the deadline for Agenda 2030, are particularly important. And just to list some of them, for instance, the interdependencies that we have among different countries and different groups of countries, which are becoming increasingly apparent. You know, so if you look at, for instance, the dependency of some countries from the wheat produced in Russia and Ukraine, this is a clear signal that these dependencies may determine the future of agri-food systems globally and in specific countries. And then there is an obvious one, which is the climate change, which links all the countries together, countries emitting a lot of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas emissions, and together with countries which emit much less but are affected by the climate change in a disproportionate way. We are increasingly talking about automation of agriculture, in many instances going through digitalization of agriculture, which includes precision agriculture, includes the Internet of Things applied to agriculture, all the different sensors that can be applied to machines that generate a lot of data. and other aspects related to digitalization, which include to some extent social media, which generate a lot of data about consumers and consumers' preferences. Well, who is going to control, who is going to own, who is going to use this big data, and under which type of governance, within which rules? This is a big issue that we try to capture, if you want, as a driving force of, potential driving force of the future of food and agriculture. Of course, food prices, you know that in 2021 and 2022, we had strong spikes, if you want, very evident spikes of food prices. And this on the top of a trend in food prices that is upward going since at least 20 years. You know, to what extent, what is this food price dynamics the signal of what precisely? And is it going to remain? Is it going to go? How is it going to affect producers and consumers? These are all questions that we have to ask ourselves if we want to understand something about the future of our food systems. And I could keep going, but you can see on my screen that there are the drivers on which we put some emphasis. And just to conclude, for instance, the fact that many production processes, not only in agriculture, but also outside agriculture, are going to rely increasingly on automation and labor substitution techniques that replace machines, labor with machines. Well, what does this mean in practice? What does this mean on technical grounds, but also what does this mean in terms of income distribution in the future? What would be the share of income that will go to labor with respect to the income, the share of income that will go to capital, to profits? And how is this going to affect the income distribution in the future, so the purchasing power of different groups of people, and so on and so forth. Just not to forget the fact that epidemics and degradation of ecosystems, in the light in particular of this COVID-19 pandemic, are probably going to take momentum. So this is just to say that as a starting point, as a starting step of the exercise of looking into the future, is to try to understand what are the driving forces, what are what we call the drivers of agri-food systems. In both reports that I'm mentioning here, there is an effort to do that. And as I said, you know, the emphasis, despite the fact that some drivers are historical drivers, the emphasis on new drivers changes depending on the specific point in time that we choose to look into the future. Now, of course, looking into the future, particularly in the long-term future, let's say 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, we have to give up any idea or any wishful thinking about predicting the future. Nothing is actually predictable with the normal intelligence that we have. Maybe, I don't know, in some years with artificial intelligence, we could predict much more. But for the time being, with the human intelligence and with the little artificial intelligence that we have, nothing is really predictable beyond 6 months or 1 year, if you are more optimistic. You know, so regarding long-term future, we can only envisage possible scenarios. And what are these scenarios? These scenarios are a description of a possible future which is characterized by some sort of internal consistency. When I say internal consistency, I mean that we have to be careful because we can design whatever scenario, but not all of them will be internally consistent. If I envisage an increase of population of 2 billion to 2050, it is unlikely that I can, in the same scenario, put a decrease of food consumption, for instance. So it may be possible, but it is unlikely that I have at the same time an increase of population of 2 billion and a decrease in food consumption, because I have to wonder what these 2 additional billion people are going to consume, as a matter of fact. So with this in mind, we may design narratives of future scenarios that depend on, that depict, if you want, possible patterns for the different drivers that we have identified. And in the work Alternative Pathways to 2050, we decided to go with 3 alternative scenarios. And these 3 alternative scenarios, so first of all, why 3? Well, 3 is just a number. They could have been 4, 5, 2, or even 1. But 3 scenarios are easy to handle and easy to communicate, easy to discuss about, because we cannot have, in principle, we could have n scenarios, but 3. Given the context of our organization and given the need to communicate to people, was a sufficient number also to depict really alternative situations about the future. And they are really alternative because one scenario towards sustainability, the green box that you see here, is a scenario of agri-food systems moving towards sustainability and resilience, while business as usual, the yellow box that you see, is a scenario where people don't change very much their behavior. Decision makers try to cope with emerging issues, but without many changes, without transformative changes. While the stratified societies is a scenario where essentially inequalities, we have exacerbated inequalities, and climate change degradation, given to the fact that rich people may not be affected very much by climate change, so they tend not to care, and the poor people are going to affect more, and this further reinforce inequalities in income and in opportunities. Well, if you see these scenarios in the slide I am showing, are cast in a 2-axis framework. Well, these 2 axes are, on one side, challenges for access to food and utilization of food, and the other one are challenges for food availability and stability in the long run. Why 2 axes? Again, for sake of communication, all the different challenges that agri-food systems face in the future have been summarized in these 2, I would say, mega challenges. One essentially related to income, the way income is distributed, the way income is accessed by people, that relate to the purchasing power of people to buy food and to buy all the facilities that require that allow to utilize food in a proper way. And the second set of challenges for food availability and stability, relate to the way, the quantity of food which is going to be produced in the future, and the way food is going to be produced in to ensure stability, long-term stability. If you stay with me and you see that where these scenarios are placed, clearly we assume that if we have sustainable scenarios, we are not going to face a lot of challenges, both in terms of availability and stability, while if we have business as usual, we're probably going to face more challenges, both in terms of access to food and availability of food. And if you see the stratified societies scenario is a scenario where we have a lot of challenges in both these families of mega challenges. Now, what can move scenarios in this challenge, in this space, in this plan, if you want, of challenges? Of course, the driving forces of agri-food systems, depending on how these driving forces are going to evolve, they will determine the position of the future, you know, in this challenge space, but also strategies and policies. What we are going to decide about the future, what we are going to decide in order to shape up our future. When I say we, I mean not necessarily me or you, maybe a bit, but all the persons who can influence the future of food and agriculture. Decision makers, for sure, governments, for sure, consumers, definitely, private businesses, civil society, and so on. You know, all these forces, the way what they decide about the future are probably going to shape up the future. Now, I may stop here for a while and ask if people have questions about what I'm saying. You know, so I stop sharing my screen for a while, and I would like to collect some questions about what I have just said, or requests of clarification or any comment that people may have. So please feel free to ask questions, particularly all the people connected via Zoom. You have the microphone, and feel free to unmute yourself and raise questions, or to put the questions in the chat if you prefer.
Okay, Lorenzo, I might start just to make ice breaking. And maybe you can tell us more about the methodology that is behind these scenarios, because you already explained that that the team select trees by ease of communication, but there was other scenarios that could be also interesting. How did you choose to present only these three?
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot, Lívia. Yes, as I said, you know, we could have designed more scenarios than that, you know, but these were enough to raise the issues that we wanted to raise in front of the audience of our work. So these three scenarios were enough to highlight the issues of sustainability and how to move towards sustainability, the issues of increasing inequality. You know, what could imply, what could increasing inequalities imply for agri-food systems, and also what type of future we are going to prepare if we keep going with business as usual. You know, and these three scenarios were based on sort of participatory exercises that we run within the organization about how to shape up the narratives for these scenarios. And what I'm going to show in a while is that downstream, after having prepared the narratives of these scenarios, we have simulated in a quantitative way some aspects of these scenarios to provide some sort of quantitative projections of key variables of agri-food systems. But essentially, until this point, we prepare narratives based on contributions of experts within the house and outside the house who wanted to see in our scenarios some issues spelled out.
I have a question, Lorenzo, if I may. Considering three major systems that intercept, that intercross between each other, consider the arable land just one system. The other system is the irrigated arable land, which is smaller, and the feasible climate conditions that we will face in the future. Considering the interception and the residual amount of arable land that we can use later in the future after these challenges, how can we answer to the need of more food, of safety food, independent of each region? I think we need to create more alternatives to what we have today regarding the arable land, which is becoming more scarce and scarce with these challenges. How these scenarios can answer this?
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question. This allows me to move forward into look at the two different sides of the coin. On one side, supply, on the other side, demand. Supply of food through the use of natural resources that you mentioned, land, the use of the adoption of different technologies in subsystems, including irrigated land, rainland, and all the interactions between climate, I would say on one side, the environmental systems, socioeconomic systems, and agri-food systems at large, So we built some possible pathways for supply and demand. And let me share my screen now.
Lorenzo, can I just interrupt you, because we have a question in chat.
Okay, yes, please.
From Valdemar. Valdemar is a PhD student and is asking, is congratulating you and is asking about the pathway alternative of food production from poor, or, well, I think he's saying about what about the developing countries in this crisis context? How is the current scenario? I think he's from Angola, and I think he wants to know more. What about
one of the issues? Of course, it's difficult to reply directly to this question. It depends on which scenario you are looking at. Low-income countries. I don't like to call them developing countries. I call them low-income countries. Where in which scenario you place yourself in the future, So because low-income countries could follow different patterns depending on the way they are going to insert themselves within the global food systems. To what extent future development patterns are going to be conducive for their position or not. Clearly, what we know now is that some of them are commodity-dependent countries. Let's say they depend very much for their well-being on few commodities, and they are fragile for that. So they are very much specialized, maybe, but very, with little resilience, I would say, endowed with little resilience to shocks, So, and depending on the way you shape up possible futures, they may become even more fragile or less fragile and more rich, if you want, less poor, depending on where you strike the balance, and depending also on actions for development of low-income countries that the international community and the government themselves will undertake. But I go back now to sharing the slide because I want to show you something about how the future could shape up in these three scenarios. And I have here a graph where I depict the global agriculture gross production value. This is an indicator of the, if you want, of the volume of the agricultural output. In the black line is the historical data, the way gross agriculture production value has evolved from 1961 until 2020 or 21. Yeah, 21. So you see, it is an upward sloping line with 2015 equal 100. And you can see that from 2012, you have three lines that depart from this black line. The red one is the scenario stratified societies. The yellow one is the scenario business as usual. And the green one is the scenario towards sustainability. You can see that it is not the amount of output that we need in the future is not cast in stone. It depends on the scenarios that we envision. In the scenario, in the green line, in the scenario moving towards sustainability, you see that there is a reduced need of getting more output because on one side, you have a reduction of food waste and loss. And at the same time, you have a reduction, in particular in income countries, of the consumption of meat, which, you know, is not a huge reduction, by the way, it's the order of 15% in income countries that may generate this slowdown of the growth of the need of generating output. And this is, you can see here a partial reply to the question, how are we going to deal with increasing population and reduced residual land available, particularly high quality land available, climate change and so on, you know, shaping up a different diets, different rebalancing diets towards less energy intensive and resource intensive food may help in this endeavor, but at the same time the opposite may also be true, you know. So, and this is where we are in the future, in the present and in the future. Number one, I can go to see where we are in terms of, for instance, producer prices. Again, the green line, sorry, this graph is wrong. The colors have been changed. So the green line is business as usual. The red line is stratified societies, while towards sustainability is the yellow one. Sorry, this graph is a bit misleading because the colors have been inverted. But the whole story is that you see that food prices, producer prices of food, deflated, have increased since 1993 until 2018, sorry, at a significant pace. Our scenarios, which are anchored in 2012, project further increases in prices. Why that? Because on one side, in the towards sustainability scenario, we envisage that a lot of externalities, let's say external costs imposed on others and not paid by producers and consumers, will be internalized. This would push food prices towards this would push up prices of food. In the stratified societies, which is a scenario of missed sustainability, prices will go up anyway because we will pay the price of unsustainability, all in all. While in the business as usual, prices are kept artificially low, but then eventually they may boom later on after 2050. Oh, these are three scenarios that may depict possible patterns of prices. And when you see the historical line and the trends, you see that they are based on some sense of the reality, what happened in the last years, and some considerations about the future. Let me show the last graph that I'm going to show you about an outcome of agri-food systems, an outcome of agri-food systems in terms of performance, in terms of undernourishment. You see that, again, the black line, the historical data. You see that in 2020, we have, in 2021, we are getting closer to 10% of prevalence of undernourishment after a period of downward trends for undernourishment. These are percentage of people suffering hunger. Well, our, if you want, best case scenario, which is towards sustainability, which projects the decreasing prevalence of undernourishment, is not going to be fulfilled because it seems that we are moving along our worst case scenario, getting closer to 10%, and then we'll see how the future is going to develop. But for what we can see now, we are moving along what we consider the worst case scenario in 2015. When we made the projection for 2017. So, not encouraging. This means that we still have something to do before relaxing. I don't share with you all the other data and information because there are too many. I refer you to the dashboard of the future of food and agriculture, where you can find a lot of information about projections to 2050. Well, let me just open on the new publication. This is what we presented at the COAG in July 2022 this year, and we are going to publish soon. As I said, in this case, we have 4 scenarios rather than 3 because we wanted to extend our analysis, and in particular, we wanted to include 2 scenarios. One raised to the bottom, which is a scenario of collapse of agri-food systems, or almost collapsing agri-food systems, at least in the first phase, and a second scenario, which is similar to towards sustainability, but we highlight the fact that there are trade-offs to deal with. We cannot get everything. We cannot get more economic growth, more fossil fuels, less climate change, more food security, more food consumption in income countries, more meat consumption everywhere, and so on. So we will have to give up something, and we try to explore what we will have to give up in order to achieve sustainable and resilient global agri-food systems. What do we need to do and in order to move towards agri-food system? Again, we don't have the crystal ball, so we can only envisage possible patterns. In particular, in the new report, we identify triggers of change. What could trigger the change of agri-food systems towards sustainability? And we highlight 4 triggers. One of them is institutions and governance, because we realize that the level of problems that we have, like climate change, conflicts, lack of resources, migrations, these are all global issues that require global governance frameworks, which are, in our view, a bit lacking now. So we need to realign the level of issues that we have to face with the level of governance that we have. A second trigger is consumer awareness, in the sense that we give a lot of emphasis to the role of consumers in as actors of change. What people are going to consume is very much important, and informed consumers who receive the right information may act in really pushing changes, probably even in a stronger way than what producers can do. I would say that to some extent consumers can shape up changes in production and in production patterns. I have already mentioned the importance of income and wealth distribution, because you can have access to food if you have access to income and if you have enough purchasing power. And if you are food insecure, clearly this means that you don't have enough income to buy enough food. Just to mention that the most recent report on the state of food security in the world, that's what we call SOFI, highlighted also the fact that more than 3 billion people cannot afford healthy diets, which means that they can afford only some sort of diets which do not assure health to people. And 3 billion is not a negligible number, is, I would say, close to 40% of the people on Earth, so which is quite a lot. Last but not less important, and this is, I come to the question of my colleague, how to reconcile, new 2 billion people more, reduce resources, increasing climate change and so on, how to deal with all that. We have to rely on innovations, both in terms of innovations in technologies and innovative, I would say, social systems, ways of interacting, ways of sharing power, ways of deciding for our future, ways of interacting among generations and so on. So innovations in terms of technologies, exploiting to the maximum extent possible what we already know, and investing a lot in finding new ways of producing and consuming. Investing means, in technical terms, giving up something today to get something more in the future. So that's why this is a trade-off. We cannot pretend to consume more today and to consume more in the future. We are in a period where we are entering a period where we have to make choices, and innovations don't come for free. We need to invest, and if you want to invest, you need to give up something today. Who has to give up what? Clearly, I cannot ask people living in Burkina Faso to give up something, because they are already almost starving, many of them. People who can give up something is people in high-income countries. And we come to the issue of justice, global justice, to ensure sustainability. Give up something in high-income countries in terms of investing more in finding global solutions to global issues, giving up consuming fossil fuels the way we consume. I mean, you know that in Europe, an average citizen emits 7 tons of CO2 equivalent per year, even more, if you look at the consumption side and not the production side. You know that in Burkina Faso, in Mali, Zambia, in those countries, what is the average emissions? They are between 0.2 and 0.3 tons, which means 20 to 30 times less. While in the US, in the United States, they emit 15 tons per capita. So it is clear that if we want to shape up a more sustainable and resilient future, some people will have to give up something to the advantage of all the others. These trade-offs are spelled out in this table. I don't want to bother you with that because this is part of the documentation we are going to share with you. And the last thing that we would like to share with you is some web links that may allow you to access the existing publications about the future of agriculture, and soon also the new one, drivers and triggers for transformation. And I stop here because I know that some people may have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. I think we have a question at the chat. Could you see?
Yeah, I see them. I see one of them. Yeah, how to address the issue of growing population while at the same time the pressure for more sustainable agri-food systems. Well, this is a big issue. You know, as a matter of fact, we know that existing technologies that could be qualified as more sustainable. In particular, I'm referring, for instance, to organic agriculture or some, I would say, technologies linked to the agroecology approaches. They don't bring the same yields as conventional agriculture. I'm not an agronomist myself, so forgive me if I say something wrong, but as far as I know about some meta studies about, for instance, organic agriculture, they estimate that the yields are 20% from, I would say, from 30 to 15% less than conventional agriculture. This is, of course, an issue because we have to nourish additional people, and if we want to go sustainable and using this way of being sustainable, we will have less yields. Okay, again, we don't have a single solution for a complex problem. As I said, on one side, we probably may need to adjust diets, in particular, avoid food, food produced with very intensive, energy-intensive production processes, like animal food. But at the same time, we may also need to test additional new technologies, for instance, precision agriculture, how to save pesticides and fertilizers, them in a more smart way using additional information that can get from digitalization. I'm not a fan, particularly of any technology over the others, you know. So my feeling is that we will have to put together all what we know and don't know to solve the issue that Rodolfo raised in the chat.
I think you have one more question, no?
No.
No,
I don't think so.
No, there is one. Just on the table.
I have a question that I put in the chat, and this is to gather an opinion from Lorenzo about whilst keeping the improvement of optimization of the intensive growing systems. Do you agree that we need a new revolution in agriculture, which can be translated by more minor, well-adapted crops by more farmers, using every piece of small land to use every space that we can use to improve the production and use mainly the localized production and intensify these systems. And this revolution, I wonder if you agree also that should be followed, as you mentioned, somehow by the revolution at consumer level, because consumers must change their aptitudes regarding the selection of food and the use of food.
Well, yes, I don't know whether we, I would call it revolution. I would call it evolution of agriculture. That's definitely yes, you know. So change. I mean, even in the first report about the future of agriculture in 2016-17, we clearly said that business as usual is no longer an option. You know, we cannot keep going with what we have done until now. Call it revolution or evolution or innovative systems. We have to move forward one way or the other. Clearly, exploiting marginal lands, in particular land that could be fertile, but it is a small scale, if it is close to urban areas, it's probably going to be interesting. It's small-scale agriculture, whether we like it or not, is a matter of fact in many countries where farm size is shrinking, including India and many countries in Africa. So we will have to find solutions for small-scale agriculture one way or the other. You know, we know that what we know now is that monoculture is more efficient because we have economies of scale and so on. But at the same time, we know that monoculture is not sustainable because it implies use of large use of pesticides, which reduce biodiversity. It implies fragility of ecosystems. It implies fragility of agri-economic systems. In the case of, for instance, all the countries that depend on Ukraine and Ukraine itself, if they don't manage to sell their wheat. And so there are big issues. So, and this is, in a nutshell, this is the trade-off between resilience of agri-food systems and efficiency. So if we specialize to the maximum extent, we may have efficient systems with high yields, until now at least, but with little resilience and with little sustainability. So definitely, call it revolution. I am not against, you know, as a matter of fact, right in the right direction.
I call revolution because this has a special meaning, because we need indeed more people in the farms. I mean, we need to attract more people to the farming systems, to the small scale farming systems, because I think more or less the intensive systems are saturated. I mean, they can be more technological, they can be optimized under several circumstances with pesticides, fertilizers, and so on, but they are more or less optimized. They are in the limit. So if we are in the limit, we cannot go further on this. So the idea is, okay, let's have more people in the farms, more people in the small farms and doing farming, and this will somehow use their own food and produce food for some others. This we never quantified in the past. I mean, 40, 50 years ago, what was the representation of or the quantity of food that was produced by small-scale farmers or local producers? What was the meaning of this production into the economy? We never were able to express this production, small production, into the economy. And now that we don't have these people, we now are facing the situation that, okay, intensive systems are not enough.
Well, you know, FAO is fully aware of the central role of small-scale farmers, not only in low-income countries, but to some extent also in middle-income and high-income countries. For instance, the fact that small farms close to towns may have huge advantages because they may be less efficient in terms of production, but at the same time they may be more efficient in terms of transport costs and proximity to markets, for instance. You know, so what you give up in terms of pure technical efficiency, you recover in terms of distributional efficiency, you know, for instance. And this may apply to low-income countries, but also to high-income countries. And to some extent, some new technologies, hydroponic technologies and so on, again, all these still require to be tested, and they require life cycle assessments, you know, because some of these technologies are really energy intensive. But there may be different ways of producing food. And there may be also novel food, which we may need to exploit in the future. Again, advertising eating insects, I'm not excited about that personally, but we have to be open. We have to be open to different solutions, because complex problems cannot have only one solution. So it's not. We have to give up this idea that there is a silver bullet that solves all the issues. It's probably a mix of solutions from the production side and from the consumption side, and also at the same time from the institutional side. The way power is shared, the way decisions are made, and the role of different stakeholders in shaping up better decisions and better informed policies. This is probably something that may allow us to shape up a sustainable future, which is probably the possible future that we can envisage, if survive. And of course, there is a little to be optimistic, frankly, if we look at the situation as it is, but I would say that being pessimistic is a luxury that we cannot afford. It's pointless to be pessimistic, because we have to mobilize all the resources that we have to shape up our future in a way that it is going to be desirable, not only for us, but also for future generations, not only for high-income countries, but also for low-income countries that eventually, I hope, they will disappear, not physically, but
Okay, Lorenzo, we are getting close to the end. We have a question that is in Portuguese, and myself wrote in the chat a question that is in English, but the question that is in Portuguese is about the CAP. I don't know if you have been working on the Common Agricultural Policy. And the question, if I understood it clearly,
it's about the new strategic plan, 2023-2027. And the question is if it's on the right direction to achieve the challenges which you talk about, or
frankly, I'm not in a position to comment about the policies of any specific country or group of countries. It would be unfair, because first of all, you need to have actors around the same table to discuss about that. But I mentioned two important workshops in the last 2 months. One from the DG Agri, in Brussels, and the other one from the European Environmental Agency. And what I can see is that they are very much concerned about the future of food and agriculture, and they are really looking forward to identify possible solutions. So whatever policies at the end of the day the European Union put forward, I realize that there are people behind who are really trying to deal with issues. Of course, you have plenty of people, you have plenty of lobbies, plenty of diverging interests from one side and from the other. And this is a matter of fact, this is the reality. This is not only in the European Union, but everywhere. So I heard voices about the fact that the new CAP not really favoring small-scale farmers, and the way the subsidies are shared may not be so conducive for a transformation. At FAO, my colleagues have done a work on repurposing agricultural subsidies to move them towards more sustainable and resilient agriculture. I don't know specifically, but I guess that also the European Union will have to repurpose somehow subsidies. And you can get this publication about repurposing subsidies. It is an interesting one, and you may get about it.
And Lorenzo, to finish, probably.
Yes.
I put you a question that is about the right price. In the report, you talk about a lot about the right prices and also the business talk about the right prices, in internalizing the externalities. And my question is, if we are able to internalize the long-term efficiency, we can get the right prices, right? And that could be, well, not resilience, but very much close to resilience. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. I see what you mean. I hope I see what you mean. So essentially, the right price is the price that covers the true cost, And FAO is going to work on the true cost of food. Probably in the next SOFA, State of Food and Agriculture, is going to address this issue. And anyway, this is an issue that we have to address. What is the true cost of food, and who is going to pay for that? Unfortunately, in many instances, food has been kept artificially cheap. And this is not good for resilience and sustainability. People tried to address the issue of food insecurity by keeping the food cheap. But if it is cheap for everybody, it doesn't work, because people tend to waste. And it is unfair, because why should food be cheap for me, who luckily can afford the true cost of food? It has to be kept cheap for specific categories, sure. But even more important than that, it is not an issue of price of food, it is an issue of income distribution. So to work on the side of income rather than on the side of prices, and this is probably some sort of revolution, because if you want to keep poor people poor by giving them cheap food, you're not going to fix the problem of food insecurity in the long run. You are simply keep people alive, but you're not addressing structural causes. Food insecurity is
Okay, it's finished. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for your attention, and thanks a lot for the interest in the work of the organization. Please browse our website. If you want, I can put you in the list of those that will be that we receive the invitation to the virtual launch of the next report on the future of food and agriculture.
Okay, that will be great. Thank you. Thank you
so much. And see you next January. Next month we won't have a session, but in January we will return with territory talks. Thank you very much.
Thanks to the participants, and thanks for your attention and invitation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you very much.